The retired Navy SEAL froze so suddenly that his pint glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the wooden floor. My cousin was still laughing when every conversation inside Murphy's Irish pub seemed to stop at once. Nobody moved, not even me. The bartender looked annoyed, at first reaching for a towel behind the counter. Then he noticed the expression on the older man's face. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't fear exactly either. It was recognition. My cousin Tyler leaned back on his bar stool, grinning like he'd just won an argument. "What?" he said. "Did I miss something?" The older man never took his eyes off me. He walked across the room slowly, the way people do when they're trying to make sure they aren't imagining something. "You say that again?" he said quietly. I sighed. "I'd really rather not." "The name?" I rubbed the back of my neck. "Hades." He stared for another second before asking the question that made my stomach tighten. "Who gave you that call sign?" No one at the table laughed anymore. Not Tyler. Not his wife Amanda. Not my Aunt Linda, who had spent the last 15 minutes telling everyone I was finally settling down into a normal job. I looked at the older man. "They did." He nodded once. "Then I know exactly who you are." My name is Rebecca Lawson. Most people call me Becky. I'm 46 years old, and for the past 6 months I've been living back in Norfolk, Virginia after spending almost 2 decades working overseas under contracts I rarely talked about. I wasn't in the military. That's important. People hear pieces of my story and immediately start filling in blanks that don't belong there. I never wore a Navy uniform. Never graduated from BUD/S. Never claimed to be anything I wasn't. But for 18 years I worked beside people who did. And sometimes that line became blurry to people watching from the outside. That Friday night, though, none of that was supposed to matter. I was just there to celebrate my cousin's 42nd birthday. Murphy's sat 3 blocks from the Elizabeth River, the kind of neighborhood place where retired sailors watched baseball while arguing over whose turn it was to buy wings. The walls were covered with Navy photographs, old command plaques, framed American flags. The waitress knew half the customers by name. It felt familiar, comfortable, until Tyler decided to entertain himself. Tyler had always been the loudest person in every room. Growing up, he could make almost anyone laugh, usually at somebody else's expense. When we were kids, that somebody was usually me. I'd been the quiet cousin, the one who liked reading, the one who disappeared during family cookouts to sit on the dock with my grandfather. Tyler called me Princess back then. Apparently 25 years hadn't changed much. "So," he said loudly after his second beer, "our world traveler finally comes home." Amanda smiled politely. "You've been everywhere, right?" "A few places." Tyler snorted. "Listen to her." I shrugged. "What? A few places?" He laughed. "You make it sound like you were delivering mail." I wasn't. "So what did you actually do?" "I worked security support." "For who?" "Different contractors." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds made up." "It really isn't." "Come on, Becky." He leaned across the table. "Mom says you spent years hanging around Special Forces guys. I worked with different military teams." "There it is." He pointed around the table. "Did everybody hear that?" Amanda gave him a look. "Tyler." "What?" "Leave it alone." "I'm just curious." He turned back toward me. "So tell us. Were you some kind of secret ninja?" A few people chuckled. I smiled. "No." "You ever actually fight anybody?" "There wasn't much point pretending." "A few times." He laughed harder. "Seriously?" "Yes." Yes. What did you use?" I answered without thinking. "Mostly hand to hand." He nearly spit out his beer. "Oh my God." He slapped the table. "Did you hear that?" My aunt laughed too. "Becky, honey?" "What?" "You sound like you're describing an action movie." I took another sip of iced tea. I answered the question. Tyler wasn't finished. "So what?" He grinned. "Knives too." I looked at him. "Sometimes." That only encouraged him. "Oh, this is priceless." He pointed dramatically. "Everybody watch this." He faced me again. "Only hand to hand." I nodded. Knives were optional. The whole table burst into laughter. Even I smiled a little. Out of context, I understood how ridiculous it sounded. Then Tyler delivered the line he'd probably been waiting to say all evening. "So let me guess." He smirked. "They called you Princess?" Without thinking, without planning, without realizing someone else might hear, I answered. "No." He leaned closer. "What then?" "Hades." That's when the glass hit the floor. The retired Navy SEAL introduced himself after everyone found their voices again. "Mike Donovan." He held out his hand. His grip was firm but respectful. "I retired 15 years ago." I figured. "You worked Task Group East." I looked surprised. "I never said that." "You didn't have to." He smiled faintly. I knew a man named Chris Morales. The name landed like a punch to my chest. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in almost 12 years. He talked about you. I swallowed. Chris didn't make it home. No, Mike's voice softened. He didn't. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Tyler finally broke the silence. Hold on, he laughed awkwardly. You guys seriously expect everybody to believe this? Mike slowly turned toward him. I didn't ask anybody to believe anything. Tyler folded his arms. This is crazy. Mike looked back at me. What are you doing these days? Consulting. You still training people? Sometimes. He nodded. You always hated attention. I still do. I can tell. Tyler scoffed. This whole thing sounds like stolen valor. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Because I'd spent 18 years making sure nobody confused my work with military service. I'd corrected people countless times. I'd never worn medals that weren't mine. Never accepted recognition meant for someone else. Yet here I was, being accused by my own family. Mike looked ready to argue. I gently touched his sleeve. It's okay. No? He shook his head. It isn't. I forced a smile. It doesn't matter. But it did. More than I wanted to admit. I suddenly realized every relative at that table was looking at me differently. Not with admiration. With suspicion. Like they'd just caught me telling the biggest lie of my life, and for the first time in years, I wondered whether keeping my past buried had been a mistake. I didn't sleep much that night. Back home, my townhouse overlooked a quiet street in Ghent, one of Norfolk's older neighborhoods. Around midnight, I stood on my small front porch with a cup of black coffee I had no business drinking that late. The streetlights reflected off parked cars, and somewhere a freight train rolled through the city. It reminded me that life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my aunt. Tyler didn't mean anything by it. He's just joking around. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone face down on the porch railing. That had always been the family explanation. He's joking. Don't take it personally. That's just Tyler. Funny how the person getting embarrassed was always expected to be the bigger person. Saturday mornings had become routine since I moved home. Around 7, I'd walk to a small coffee shop on Colley Avenue, pick up a plain bagel and coffee, then stop at Harris Teeter before the crowds arrived. Predictable routines helped quiet my mind. I had just reached the checkout when someone behind me said my name. Rebecca? I turned. Mike Donovan stood there carrying nothing but a gallon of milk and dog food. Morning. I smiled. Morning. You mind if I walk with you? Not at all. Outside, the July humidity hit us like a warm blanket. Mike nodded toward my grocery bag. So, exciting Saturday. I bought bananas. He laughed. I knew there was something dangerous about you. For the first time since the night before, I laughed too. We walked slowly toward the parking lot. I owe you an apology, he said. You don't owe me anything. I probably made things worse. You didn't. You looked uncomfortable. I was, he nodded. I remember Chris saying that. Saying what? She hates being noticed. Hearing Chris Morales' name again felt strange. He'd been a Navy chief who treated everyone civilian or military with the same respect. During one deployment, he'd started calling me Hades. After I kept dragging exhausted men through mountain training exercises they insisted they could finish on their own. The nickname spread. I never encouraged it. I never asked for it. It just stayed. You knew him well, I asked. Mike smiled. We served together twice. I miss him. So do I. We stood beside my SUV without speaking for nearly a minute. Finally, Mike looked at me. You ever tell your family what you actually did? No. Why? Because they couldn't have known most of it. And now, I shrugged. Now it doesn't matter. I'm not sure that's true. It mattered more than I realized. By Sunday afternoon, Tyler had uploaded a 3-minute video to Facebook. Amanda hadn't known. His kids hadn't known. Nobody had tried stopping him. He recorded it from his backyard while flipping burgers. You won't believe what happened Friday. He laughed into the camera. My cousin claims she was some kind of secret operator. He exaggerated everything. He imitated my voice. He repeated the hand-to-hand line 3 different times. Then he looked into the camera and said, Folks, if somebody tells you they have some mysterious call sign nobody's ever heard of, maybe ask for proof. He winked. Or maybe they're just full of it. By Monday morning, the video had spread farther than anyone expected. Local community groups shared it. Veterans argued in the comments. Some defended me. Most assumed I was another person pretending to have military experience. One comment hit harder than the others. People who fake military service deserve jail. I closed the app. My stomach felt sick. On Tuesday, I received 3 emails. The first was from my supervisor asking if everything was okay. The second was from an old coworker in Texas who had somehow seen the video. The third simply read, "Call me," no signature, only a phone number. I almost deleted it. Something stopped me. When I called, a familiar voice answered, "Rebecca." I closed my eyes. Linda Chavez had supervised civilian intelligence teams for years. We hadn't spoken in almost 4 years. I heard. So did half the internet. "You all right?" "I've been better." "You want us to say something?" I knew exactly what she meant. People still connected to the Department of Defense. People who knew the truth. "No." "You sure?" "Certain. You've spent 20 years protecting other people's privacy." "I know. Sometimes people should protect yours." I looked out my office window. Across the parking lot, someone pushed shopping carts toward the grocery store next door. Normal life. Regular people. Exactly what I'd wanted when I retired. "I appreciate it," I finally said. "But leave it alone." Linda sighed. "You haven't changed." "I hope not." That evening, I stopped by Murphy's again. Not because I wanted to. Because I hated leaving things unfinished. Mike sat at the same end of the bar watching a Baltimore Orioles game. He motioned toward the empty stool beside him. "They've got decent crab cakes tonight." "I'll take your word for it." The bartender set down iced tea before I even ordered. "On him," she said, pointing toward Mike. "Thanks." Mike smiled. "I figured no coffee after 6. "You've done your homework." "I pay attention." For a while we watched the game. No talk about overseas, no talk about Tyler. Just baseball. Eventually he broke the silence. "People online can be cruel. They don't know me." "They think they do." I nodded. "They've built a whole version of me from one joke." "What bothers you most?" I thought about that. Finally, I answered honestly. "They think I'm trying to steal something." "Respect." "No." I looked around the room. "Memory." He understood immediately. The people I worked beside. The ones who never came home. The ones whose families still sent Christmas cards to old teammates. Those were the people I worried about dishonoring. Not myself. As if the week couldn't get worse, my phone rang Thursday afternoon. Amanda. Her voice sounded nervous. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For Tyler. He'll get over it." "No?" She hesitated. "He won't." "What do you mean?" "He got invited onto a local podcast." I frowned. "Why?" "They want him to talk about exposing fake veterans." I leaned back in my chair. "Seriously?" "He thinks it's funny." "And you?" I told him to stop. He won't listen. "No." She paused. "I don't think he realizes he's hurting you." I almost laughed. "Oh, he realizes?" After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore the whole thing. Eventually, people would move on. The internet always finds someone new. But another part of me wondered if staying silent was making the lie stronger. For years, I'd believed that keeping my past private was the honorable choice. Now that silence was becoming evidence against me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could live with that. By the following Monday, I had stopped reading the comments. At first, I'd tell myself I was just checking to see if things had calmed down. That was a lie. Every time I opened Facebook, I was hoping someone had posted the truth before I had to. Nobody did. The internet had already decided who I was. A woman in her 40s claiming she'd worked around elite military units. That sounded ridiculous to most people. The fact that I'd refused interviews or wouldn't post old photos only convinced them I had something to hide. Funny how keeping promises can make you look guilty. Around 10 that morning, my phone rang while I was organizing training schedules at the security consulting firm where I'd been working since moving back to Norfolk. "Rebecca Lawson." "Speaking." "My name is Sarah Whitaker. I'm a reporter with WAVY-TV. I closed my eyes for a second. "Here we go. If this is about my cousin's video, it is. I'm not interested." "I understand." She didn't sound pushy. I'd still appreciate 2 minutes. I almost hung up anyway. Instead, I waited. "We've been looking into the story," she continued. "Something unusual happened." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We contacted the Department of Defense for comment. And they wouldn't discuss your work." I expected that. "But they also didn't deny that you worked under government contracts." That got my attention. Sarah continued carefully. "One official told us your employment history couldn't be fully discussed because portions remain restricted." I looked out my office window toward the parking lot. A delivery truck was backing into the loading dock. Everything outside looked ordinary. Inside my head, nothing did. "I can't comment." "I understand." "We're not trying to embarrass you." "I'm already embarrassed." There was a pause. "I believe you." That surprised me. "You don't even know me." "No." she answered honestly. But I've interviewed enough veterans to recognize when someone avoids taking credit. I smiled despite myself. She wasn't wrong. I still don't want an interview. I'll respect that. Before hanging up, she added one sentence. If you change your mind, I'd rather tell the whole story than the version social media invented. That evening, Mike invited me to dinner. Not somewhere fancy. Just Dumar's Drive-In. If you've lived around Hampton Roads long enough, you've probably eaten there. Burgers, barbecue limeades, and old-fashioned ice cream cones made the same way they've been making them for generations. We sat outside beneath the striped awning. Mike looked at me over a basket of onion rings. You look tired. I am. You sleeping? Not much. He nodded knowingly. Still carrying everybody else's problems? I've always been good at that. He smiled. Chris used to complain about it. He complained about everything. He did. We both laughed. For a little while, the conversation drifted toward lighter things. Baseball, fishing, the ridiculous price of groceries. Then Mike became serious again. You know what's bothering me? I've got a few guesses. You've spent your whole adult life protecting people. I did my job. And now you're letting one loudmouth rewrite your story. I sighed. I don't need strangers believing me. No, he leaned forward. But the families of the men you worked beside deserve better than watching someone call you a fraud. That sentence stayed with me, because he wasn't talking about my reputation. He was talking about theirs. 3 days later, Sarah Whitaker called again. I think you should know something. What now? We've uncovered another angle. I waited. Your cousin has been describing himself as a combat veteran during interviews. I sat upright. What? We checked. And he enlisted years ago. I knew that. He completed basic training. I knew that too. But he never deployed. I rubbed my forehead. He received a medical discharge before finishing advanced training. I closed my eyes. So he's letting people think he served overseas. That's what it looks like. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Disappointment. Tyler didn't need combat stories to deserve respect. He had worked hard his whole life. Raised 2 good kids. Held the same job for nearly 20 years. Why wasn't that enough? Why borrow someone else's experience? The irony wasn't lost on me. The man accusing me of pretending had quietly been letting people exaggerate his own military background. That weekend, I unlocked a storage container I hadn't opened since moving home. It sat in the corner of my garage behind camping equipment and Christmas decorations. Inside were 3 weathered plastic bins. The first contained ordinary things. Old passports, maps, foreign currency. The second held photographs. Most had never been shared online. None showed combat. Just ordinary moments. People laughing over burned coffee. Christmas decorations hanging inside temporary offices. Someone grilling hamburgers in the middle of nowhere. Real life. The third box was the hardest. Letters. Handwritten cards. Memorial programs. A folded American flag that had been presented to a family not mine after a funeral. The widow had asked me to keep a copy of her husband's final letter because I'd helped translate portions of reports connected to his last mission. I hadn't looked at it in years. I carefully placed everything on my dining room table. Then I found the envelope. Inside was a commendation letter released several years earlier after portions of one operation had finally been declassified. No dramatic language. No secret missions. Just a simple acknowledgement that civilian personnel had assisted in evacuating injured service members during an attack on a medical convoy. My name appeared halfway down the page. Nothing more. Nothing less. Exactly the way I'd wanted it. I stared at that paper for nearly 10 minutes. Proof had been sitting in my garage all along. On Monday afternoon, Sarah visited my office, not with a camera. Just a notebook. I promised no pressure. I remember. She looked around the small conference room. You brought something. I slid the folder across the table. These are the only documents I'm comfortable sharing. She opened it slowly. Photographs. Letters. The commendation. Copies of employment contracts with most of the sensitive information blacked out. She didn't rush. She read everything carefully. Finally, she looked up. You weren't kidding. No. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? I smiled. Because nobody back then wanted attention. She nodded. I think people need to hear this. I don't. She laughed softly. I figured. Before leaving, she stopped at the door. Our station is covering the Veterans Appreciation Fundraiser at the American Legion Hall next Saturday. I've heard about it. They've invited your cousin to speak. I wasn't surprised. He accepted. I'm sure he did. She hesitated. We'd like to invite you too. I almost said no. Actually, I did say no. Then she added one more sentence. Several people who served with the men you worked beside will be there. I looked at the folder on the table, at the photographs, at faces that hadn't crossed my mind in years. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about defending myself anymore. Maybe it was finally time to defend the truth. By the time Saturday arrived, I had almost talked myself out of going. 3 different times. I ironed a navy blue blouse, changed into a gray sweater, instead then switched back again. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, wondering why I was nervous. It wasn't because of Tyler. It wasn't even because of the crowd. It was because I had spent almost 20 years avoiding exactly this kind of attention. Now I was about to walk straight into it. At 9:30 that morning, Mike pulled into my driveway in his silver Ford F-150. "You ready?" he asked. "No," he smiled. "Good. What? Only people looking for trouble show up feeling confident." I laughed. "You always have a line ready. Retirement gives you plenty of time to practice." The drive from Norfolk to the American Legion Hall in Chesapeake took a little over 20 minutes. Neither of us talked much. The local radio station was playing old Eagles songs, and Mike hummed along while I watched neighborhoods roll past the passenger window. I kept thinking about one question. What if this made everything worse? The parking lot was already filling when we arrived. Pickup trucks, family sedans, motorcycles with veteran decals. Volunteers were setting up folding chairs under white tents beside the building. Someone was grilling hot dogs, and the smell drifted across the lot. It felt less like a formal ceremony and more like a community reunion. Inside, the hall walls were covered with military photographs, unit flags, and framed service plaques. Families greeted one another. Children ran between tables. Older veterans compared stories over coffee. Nobody paid much attention to me. Exactly the way I liked it. Until Sarah Whitaker spotted us. She walked over carrying a microphone, but left the camera crew behind. "I'm glad you came. I haven't agreed to an interview." "I know." She smiled. "I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me." "I'm still deciding whether that was a mistake." She laughed. "Fair enough." Tyler arrived about 15 minutes later. He walked in wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt with a small American flag embroidered over the pocket. He looked confident, almost energized. Several people recognized him from the viral clips online. A few even shook his hand. He smiled for every picture. Amanda followed a few steps behind, looking uncomfortable. When she noticed me across the room, she gave a small, apologetic wave. I waved back. Tyler saw me. His smile faded. "So," he walked over. "You actually came." "I was invited. I figured you'd stay home." "I almost did." He crossed his arms. "You still pretending?" Mike stepped forward before I could answer. "Careful." Tyler looked him up and down. "I wasn't talking to you." "No," Mike replied calmly. "But you're about to embarrass yourself again." Tyler rolled his eyes. "You military guys always stick together." Mike didn't answer. He simply walked away. That irritated Tyler more than an argument would have. The program began just after 11. A local high school choir sang the national anthem. The mayor welcomed everyone. Several Vietnam veterans were recognized. Gold Star families received a standing ovation. For a while, everything felt exactly the way it should. Then the moderator introduced Tyler. He walked confidently onto the stage carrying note cards. At first, his speech stayed on topic. He thanked veterans, mentioned patriotism, talked about honoring service. Then he drifted. "I think it's important," he said into the microphone, "that we also protect the honor of people who really served." A few people nodded. "There are too many fake stories online these days." I felt Mike glance toward me. Tyler continued. "Sometimes people invent exciting backgrounds because ordinary lives aren't enough." The room became quieter. He wasn't saying my name. He didn't have to. Everyone understood. Then he smiled. "In fact," he looked directly at me. "My own cousin has convinced herself she worked alongside elite military units." A few uncomfortable laughs floated through the audience. "She even claims she had some mysterious nickname." He chuckled. Hades, silence. Tyler spread his hands dramatically. "Folks," he laughed. "Does that sound believable to anybody?" The moderator looked uncomfortable. Before she could move on, Mike slowly stood. "May I say something?" She nodded. "Please." Mike walked toward the stage without hurrying. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. He accepted the microphone. "My name is Mike Donovan." His voice carried easily across the room. "I retired from the Navy after 26 years. The room immediately became attentive. "I don't usually involve myself in family disagreements." He looked toward Tyler. "But when someone attacks another person's integrity..." He paused. especially someone who spent years protecting people without asking for recognition. I think the truth matters. Tyler folded his arms. Mike continued. I knew Chief Chris Morales. Several veterans in the audience exchanged glances. I also knew Rebecca Lawson. He turned toward me. Not because she wanted attention, because she earned our respect. The room stayed completely still. Mike smiled slightly. Rebecca never claimed to be a SEAL, never claimed to wear our uniform. In fact, I've personally heard her correct people who gave her too much credit. He looked back toward the audience. The nickname wasn't something she invented. It was something professionals gave her. Sarah stepped onto the stage next. She carried a folder. I'd like everyone's permission to clarify a few publicly verified facts. The moderator nodded. Sarah opened the folder. We contacted multiple government offices. She spoke carefully. No classified information will be discussed. She displayed copies of declassified documents on a large screen behind the stage. Employment records, commendation letters, released mission acknowledgements. Nothing sensational, just facts. Then photographs appeared. Rebecca helping unload medical supplies. Rebecca standing beside civilian contractors. Rebecca laughing over coffee with people whose names had been partially covered for privacy. One older Marine near the front quietly whispered, I remember that convoy. Another veteran stood. So do I. Then another. I never met her. But I knew the team. Within moments, 4 different veterans had risen from different parts of the room. None exaggerated. None told dramatic stories. Each simply confirmed one small piece, like witnesses fitting together parts of a puzzle. Sarah closed the folder. There's one more issue. She looked toward Tyler. Our investigation also reviewed public statements regarding Mr. Tyler Lawson's own military service. Tyler's face changed. He knew. He enlisted honorably. Sarah continued. He completed basic training. She paused. He was medically discharged before operational deployment. Nobody judged him. There was nothing shameful about that. Then Sarah added gently, Unfortunately, recent interviews allowed audiences to believe he served in combat. The room became painfully quiet. Tyler looked around. No one was applauding now. No one was laughing. Amanda lowered her head. Tyler swallowed hard. His voice cracked. I never actually said I deployed. No, Sarah answered. But you never corrected people who assumed it. He didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. Finally, Tyler looked at me. Not with anger. With exhaustion. I was tired, he admitted quietly. Tired of everyone thinking you were extraordinary. I blinked. He continued. You disappear for years. You come home. Everybody wonders what you did. And he looked down. I've lived here my whole life. For the first time, I saw the little boy I had grown up with. Not the loud man. Just someone carrying an old insecurity. The moderator handed me the microphone. I could have embarrassed him. I could have reminded everyone how many jokes he'd made. How many interviews he'd given. How badly he'd hurt me. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I took one slow breath. I've worked beside some incredibly brave people. I looked around the room. The strongest among them never needed strangers to think they were heroes. I handed the microphone back. Neither do we. Nobody spoke. Then someone near the back began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was standing. Not because I had won. Because the truth finally had. The applause faded, but the silence afterward stayed with me much longer. People slowly returned to their seats. Some wiped away tears. Others simply stared at the stage as if they were replaying everything that had happened over the last 15 minutes. I stood off to one side, wishing I could disappear into the crowd. Old habits die hard. Mike walked over and handed me a bottle of water. You handled that better than I would have. I twisted the cap open. I almost didn't. He smiled. I know. I wanted to embarrass him. Of course you did. I even rehearsed a speech in my head. What stopped you? I looked across the room. Tyler was sitting alone in the front row with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor while everyone else mingled around him. He already looked miserable. Mike nodded. That's usually what the truth does. People began approaching me one at a time. Not for photographs. Not for autographs. Just conversations. A Vietnam veteran introduced himself as Frank. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I watched those videos online. He shook his head. I believed every word. You weren't the only one. He looked embarrassed. My generation was taught to question big stories. I understand. No. He smiled sadly. I should have remembered that the quiet ones usually carry the heaviest load. We shook hands before he walked away. A Gold Star mother hugged me without saying a word. She simply squeezed my hand. Some things don't need explaining. Amanda found me outside near the parking lot. She looked like she'd been crying. I'm so sorry. You've apologized enough. No. She shook her head. I should have stopped him sooner. You tried. He wouldn't listen. I know. She looked toward the building. I don't think he realized where the jokes were taking him. I don't think so either. She hesitated. Will you ever forgive him? I thought about that longer than she probably expected. I already have. She looked surprised. That doesn't mean everything goes back to normal. No, forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. She nodded slowly. I understand. I'll always be his cousin. I smiled gently. But rebuilding trust takes longer than saying I'm sorry. Tyler didn't come looking for me that day. Honestly, I was relieved. Some conversations need time before they can happen honestly. About 3 weeks passed before my doorbell rang one Saturday afternoon. When I opened the door, there he was. No audience, no cameras, no jokes, just Tyler. He held a paper grocery bag. I brought pie. I couldn't help laughing. What kind? Apple. Store-bought. I baked it. I looked at him. You baked a pie. My wife supervised. That sounded more believable. I stepped aside. You'd better come in. The pie wasn't perfect. The crust was a little overcooked. The filling was sweeter than it needed to be. It might have been the best pie I'd ever eaten, because neither of us pretended it wasn't awkward. We sat at my kitchen table with coffee between us. Finally, Tyler spoke. I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me anything you don't mean. I mean it. He rubbed his hands together. I've been jealous of you for years. I raised an eyebrow. Jealous? You left? I did. You saw the world. He looked around my townhouse. I stayed here. You raised 2 great kids. I know. You've been married 20 years. I know. You've kept the same friends since high school. He laughed quietly. When you put it that way, I mean it. He sighed. I kept thinking you had some exciting life while mine was ordinary. There is nothing ordinary about raising a family. I didn't see it. No, you were busy comparing. He nodded. I guess I was. After a long silence, he reached into his pocket. I deleted everything. The videos. Every one of them. He looked embarrassed. I also posted an apology. I saw it. You did. It was a good one. I almost didn't write it. I know. You always know. I smiled. I've known you since you were 6. That finally broke the tension. For the first time in weeks, we laughed together. Life slowly settled back into something that resembled normal. The internet found another controversy. People stopped recognizing me at the grocery store. Murphy's Irish Pub went back to being just another neighborhood bar. Every Thursday evening, Mike and I met there for dinner. Sometimes we'd watch baseball. Sometimes we'd argue about whether the Orioles needed better pitching. Sometimes we'd sit quietly without saying much at all. Those became some of my favorite evenings. Not because we talked about the past, because we didn't have to. In October, Mike invited me to volunteer with a nonprofit that helped veterans transition into civilian jobs. At first, I wasn't sure I belonged. I'm not a veteran, I reminded him. He smiled. I know. So why me? Because you've spent your whole life helping people find solid ground. That sounded like something Chris Morales would have said. So I agreed. Every Tuesday evening, I helped people prepare resumes, practice interviews, and navigate job applications. Nothing dramatic, just practical help. One retired Army sergeant struggled with email. Another Marine needed help translating military experience into civilian language. A Navy corpsman was terrified of his first interview after 23 years in uniform. Watching them rebuild their lives reminded me that courage doesn't end when service does. Sometimes it begins afterward. Late one autumn afternoon, I drove alone to Arlington National Cemetery. I hadn't visited in years. The leaves were turning shades of gold and red. The grounds were quiet, except for distant footsteps and the occasional breeze moving through the trees. I stopped at one particular headstone. Chief Chris Morales. I stood there for several minutes. I finally told part of the story, I said softly. I hope I got it right. The wind answered in its own way. I smiled. You would have hated all the attention. That thought made me laugh. So did I. Before leaving, I rested my hand gently against the cool marble. Then I walked away. Not because I was forgetting. Because carrying memories doesn't always mean carrying their weight forever. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see back then. For years, I believed staying silent was always the honorable choice. Sometimes it is. But sometimes silence allows someone else's lie to become louder than the truth. Standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean tearing someone else down. The best revenge I ever found wasn't humiliation. It was refusing to become the kind of person who had hurt me. Tyler and I still disagree sometimes. He's still louder than everyone else at family cookouts. I'm still the one who slips away to sit near the water when things get noisy. Some things never change, and maybe they don't need to. As for that old nickname, I don't think about it much anymore. The people who gave it to me are the only ones who ever needed to understand it. These days I'm simply Rebecca. That's more than enough. If this story reminded you that the quietest people often carry the deepest stories, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need that reminder today. And if you'd like to hear another story about resilience, family, and finding strength without losing your kindness, I'd be grateful to have you join me again.